The Pinkertons, Chapter 11. I wonder if you are beginning to guess at what had happened and why. Of course, it was all connected to Patty and Percival and the clockwork radio that Patty had bought from the Emporium. Now, you may be thinking that the radio had been magical after all, despite what Miss Clover and Miss Star had thought. But no, that was not it. The radio was magical, of course, in the way that all radios and all music is magic. But what I mean to say is that it was not magical in an out-of-the-ordinary sort of way. What happened would still have happened even if it had been a totally different radio, say one bought in a shop near to where you live. However, none of the adventures of the previous chapter or the adventures still coming up in the story would ever have happened had not Patty been delving in her mother's closet, for that is where she found the shoes. For of course that is what she found, wrapped in green tissue paper, those sparkling magenta shoes, the Melody Migrators. For although the clockwork radio was not magical, the shoes most definitely were. And this is what had happened. Patty had unwrapped the green tissue paper parcel. She had gasped in delight. These shoes were beautiful. And there were 4 of them, and that was both unusual and special too. They were the most lovely, sparkly shoes she had ever seen. Why on earth did her mother never wear them? Well, if her mother wasn't going to wear them, then she, Patty, would. In a few moments, each of her 4 paws was encased in its own beautiful magenta shoe. Now, you might be thinking that the shoes would not have fitted Patty at all, but in fact, the shoes were only a little bit too large, as Cynthia's paws were small for an adult guinea pig, and Patty's own paws had been growing rapidly over the preceding few months. Now, if you think back, you will remember that Percival had wound up the clockwork radio and had eventually managed to tune it to a station. It was actually Radio 4. If you have ever listened to Radio 4, you will know that it is not primarily a music station. But right now a song was playing, a very famous song in fact. At just the same moment that Patty's 4th and final paw was shod, the music from the radio reached the chorus. The singer's voice filled the room with the words, "We all live in the yellow submarine." And at that very moment, Patty, Percival, and the clockwork radio were all lifted gently into the air. On finding themselves in said yellow submarine, Patty and Percival had little chance to take in their surroundings or even to register their surprise before suddenly the song launched into the next verse. The singer was continuing, "And our friends are all aboard." And at these words, Patty and Percival's parents suddenly appeared in their midst. As well as Cynthia and Claude Pinkerton, Sylvia and Sam Silky also arrived, looking most bemused. Sylvia's special dahlia, however, luckily seemed to have remained in situ in the Silky's garden. I'm not sure it would have enjoyed being uprooted. It wouldn't have been the right time to do that. But someone else had arrived too. It was Oliver, Percival's pet newt, complete with tank. I'm not sure whether Oliver really registered his new surroundings. He didn't seem overly surprised to find himself in a yellow submarine, but then it is difficult to tell with a newt. Percival was overjoyed to see his pet. If you recall, the plan had been for Percival to use the hay twists as a decoy. He still had them on him, and he thought that Oliver might be hungry, and so he tried to offer Oliver a bite of one of the twists, which were very well travelled by this stage in the proceedings. Oliver didn't seem any more interested in the hay twist being offered to him than he had been in the cauliflower leaves earlier on. So Percival, not wishing to let anything go to waste, popped it into his own mouth. After all, it was a long time since lunch. The song on the radio was continuing. Many more of us live next door. The older Pinkertons and Mr. and Mrs. Silky were still looking around a little confused, and Percival was munching away absent-mindedly. But Patty had spotted something. All of a sudden, she pointed excitedly out of a porthole. Everyone looked at where she was pointing. An almost identical, but slightly smaller yellow submarine was gliding along through the water next to them, in parallel. Through the porthole in the second submarine, Patty spotted Miss Michaela. And who was that with her? Ah, yes, Patty recognised him. Wasn't it Simmy Chai from the Emporium? Patty waved at them, and catching sight of her, they each gave a merry wave in response. Sylvia and Sam Silky decided to explore the rest of the submarine. It was large, and there was plenty to look at. There were lots of dials everywhere. Neither Sam nor Sylvia knew what any of them were for, but Sam, who, if truth be told, seemed to have opinions on most topics, was enjoying himself thoroughly by pointing to various instruments and giving Sylvia his opinion on what they might be. This left the four Pinkertons alone together. Claude Pinkerton was undergoing an internal struggle. On the one hand, he was feeling cross. He didn't like adventures of this kind. In fact, he didn't like adventures of any kind. He would have much preferred it if he had still been in the Silky's garden discussing gnawing noseball. Or, better still, he thought, he would have liked to have been in his own home. Furthermore, wherever he was, he most definitely would have preferred to be on dry land. On the other hand, at least he did have his family with him, which was always reassuring, and they all seemed safe and well, and frankly, even to be rather enjoying themselves. Claude, as was probably to be expected, blamed the radio for everyone's unexpected sudden migration. Now, you and I know something, dear reader, that Claude did not. In fact, I imagine that you know quite a lot of things that he did not, but I am talking specifically about something of relevance to this story. And that thing is this, that it was actually, at least in part, Claude's ban on music with words that had caused this yellow submarine magical incident. For if there had not been a ban, then Patty and Percival would never have felt the need to try to hide the radio. And if they had not been trying to hide the radio, then they would never have found the quad of magenta shoes. For it was only because Patty had been wearing the shoes when the song had begun that anything magical had happened. If Patty and Percival had simply been listening to the radio at home, barefoot on the hay floor as they usually were, then regardless of what songs had come on, they would have remained where they were, at home. So in some way, Cyril and his band were responsible for their current predicament, or adventure, depending on how one looked at it. But, as you yourself will know, dear reader, apportioning blame is rarely, if ever, helpful, and it is probably better that Claude doesn't know. He was only trying to help, after all. Patty Pinkerton was at this very moment apologising to her mother. She did feel she had done something wrong in smuggling the radio into the family home. Her mother, in response to Patty's little speech, had simply snuggled Patty up close to her and rubbed Patty's fluffy cheek with her own pink nose. Patty rightly took this to be a sign that all was forgiven and all was made well again. Percival Pinkerton was still absent-mindedly munching. He had finished his first hay twist and had then popped a second one into his mouth. But Cynthia Pinkerton was deep in thought. Like her husband, she wasn't particularly quick-witted, but unlike him, her thoughts did tend, eventually, to progress in a straight line rather than in a circle. Cynthia was thinking. She had noticed Patty's feet, and she had noticed the shoes, and she was thinking about the shoes that Patty was still wearing. The song on the radio had finished. Now there was only talking. None of the Pinkertons were taking much notice. In fact, they were not taking any notice at all. Sylvia and Sam returned, and as soon as Sylvia heard a little of the radio programme, she recognised it at once as being Desert Island Discs. I recently was able to look it up in the radio archives, and I found the particular programme, and I managed to find the transcript. Here is what was being said. It may throw some light on what happened next. And that was Yellow Submarine, chosen by my castaway today, George Bluffer Humble, formerly known as Mr. Magical Miscellany, and no doubt also known to many listeners as Mr. Meteor. So, George, and I take it that you are happy for me to call you George.
Oh, yes. I just calls myself Mr. Meteor in business circles like, and at my numerous book signings and the like.
Yes. So, George, you have said in your autobiography that the example of your grandparents was very important to you. That, how is it that you put it in the book again? Ah, yes, now I have it open in front of me. That you feel that it is from them that you gained your unique blend of charisma, determination, charm and ambition. So you feel, George, that their example has helped you in your rise to the top of your field?
Well, yeah, maybe a bit, I suppose, now I come to think of it. And I definitely thought it would sound good to put that in my book. Sort of grateful and humble, like. Humble by name, humble by nature, as me. Although, really, my success is just down to me, myself. I have a certain magic that is all my own.
Yes, quite. And your grandparents? So did they live nearby when you were growing up? You saw them often, did you?
I grew up in London, but my grandparents was in Scotland.
Right. Next record.
So I've chosen this here particular record to remind me of my grandparents, him as I was telling you about. The song is to do with those eye-rise flats you sometimes get. But of course it also reminds me of my own meteoric rise, like in the world of business.
Yes. Back on the submarine, the talking on the radio had finished. It was time for another song. It was a different style of song this time. The music began with a long introduction by drum and fiddle, and then later on a singer joined in. "Oh, ye canny fling pieces oot a 20-story flat," he sang. It was near the end of the song this time that it happened again. All four Pinkertons, and Sam and Sylvia, and the Clockwork Radio, and Oliver in his tank, all found themselves lifted up from the floor. But no one crashed into the yellow ceiling. It was as if the submarine just melted away and all the water in the sea evaporated. They found themselves set down gently somewhere completely different. Somewhere outside with a slight cool breeze, and somewhere which was, much to Claude's relief, definitely on dry land. But it was also somewhere that he did not recognise at all. In fact, none of the group had the faintest idea where they were. The sun was higher in the sky than Patty had thought it should have been. After all, it had already been almost dusk when she and Percival had left the Emporium, and that must have been quite a while ago now. And yet here, wherever they were, the sun was still high up in the sky. It looked like it could only be about midday, around lunchtime. Patty felt her tummy give a little gurgle, and she realised that she was feeling hungry. Crowds of slightly grubby but very happy-looking human children were milling around. They had obviously enjoyed a good morning outside having fun, and their clothes bore the evidence of this. For sometimes it is hard to have lots of fun and to keep one's clothes clean and tidy both at the same time. The human children had not noticed the guinea pigs down on the ground, even though the sudden appearance of 6 guinea pigs, one of whom was cradling a tank containing a newt, is not generally considered to be an everyday occurrence. But I suppose that as well as failing to notice very big things, sometimes as humans, we fail to notice the very small things too. And, compared to the children, the guinea pigs were rather small. They were certainly not at eye level for even the smallest child. Now, you might have thought that the children would have noticed the radio even if they hadn't noticed the guinea pigs. You would think they would have heard it. But because the magic had happened near the end of the song, by the time the guinea pigs had arrived at, well, wherever they were, somewhere in Scotland, I think, the music had finished. The interview was still continuing, but because there was a lot of general chatter going on in the city, for it seemed to be a city, the sound of the voices coming from the radio was easily lost. As to why the magic worked slower this time, I cannot say. Perhaps it was because the clockwork radio was running out of juice, for the radio the twins had bought would only run for a certain amount of time before it needed the handle to be wound up again. But then, thinking about it, since it wasn't the radio that was magical, why would its level of charge have made any difference to anything at all? Patty was looking down at her shoes. They were getting a bit dusty and worn, and much more so than you would expect, given that they had only been worn so little. They looked like shoes that had been well used. They certainly looked less sparkly than they had done at first too. Perhaps it was this that was slowing down the magic. Perhaps the magic of the shoes was beginning to run out. I cannot be sure. But in any case, whilst Patty was looking down at her feet, the human children were actually looking upwards. They were looking upwards expectantly, as if they knew that something was about to happen, as if they were waiting for that something to happen. High up above the children, and of course this was even higher up above the guinea pigs, came the sound of windows being opened. Lots of windows being opened, and some things started flying down. The guinea pigs couldn't tell what it was that was falling, but whatever it was, there was lots of it, and it was heading straight towards them very fast indeed.